Thaddeus Dixon's headed to Chapel Hill.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson, his site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first look of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. For the first whistle of the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all day, every day today. We're going to get into some of our 2025 agendas. Just a fun theme on this show that if you're new, you're going to figure it out real quick. We get annoying about our agendas, and we absolutely love it. Also, if you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button, as it does really help us out. We really appreciate that. We're also going to assess some of Washington's biggest transfer portal losses of the year, because Lars, arguably the biggest one happened on Saturday afternoon when Thaddeus Dixon departed for North Carolina. Obviously, Washington fans wanted him to stay. He expressed plenty of interest on wanting to come back, but he ultimately chooses to go to Chapel Hill.
So let's unpack that, because on some level, I do agree that it is the quote-unquote biggest loss, but it was a loss that wasn't expected to be a loss, because that was expected to be preparing for the NFL draft. It would be like saying Carson Bruner's a loss because he's going to the NFL. In that mold, because the reason why I say that is you look at UNC, and I remember putting this out on Twitter, and I got a UNC fan responding to me saying, "Hey, we're in the mix too." And I said, "Yeah, but you're not losing a CB1. You guys don't have any cornerbacks." Right. That was the reason why Thad went to UNC, was because not only were they not losing a Trey Amos or a Will Johnson, they didn't have either one of those dudes on the roster. And I'm not saying Thad's in that class, but Thad is going to UNC for one more year to put himself in that class, to put himself in a day one, day two conversation. Whereas right now, could he be a day two, third, fourth rounder? Well, and that's what I'm saying. So why not go get one more year at outside, maybe have a first or second team all conference season in the ACC and become a fourth or fifth round pick?
Sure. And I agree with you in that regard. And it's something that you and I have seen a lot of on Twitter over the last couple of days. And the first thing you bring up a great point in, he was not expected to be back this season. So that part of it is crucial to remember as we just kind of continue on through the show, because the other big part of this, Lars, is people have been very critical of this whole Steve Belichick thing. And there's a lot to unpack there. In our insider exclusive Q&A that we did last Friday, we did unpack it. We're going to do like kind of a minute version of that right here, because the most important thing to remember, and I've seen Softy and a whole bunch of other people put out being like, "Oh, you should have fired Belichick on the spot." Nobody was eating that $1.2 million buyout. So that part of it in and of itself is like right there why it's not happening. Washington was going to do that because it's silly to do that for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. North Carolina is not going to do that because they're just not going to do that. Like that in itself is obvious as well. But whatever was going on behind the scenes is what it was. We're not confirming anything. We're not denying anything. But the one thing that I think people have forgotten to, just forgotten with this whole process, guys were going to leave. The roster was going to be at 85 no matter what. And if you think that, people might have already stated their intentions to hit the portal behind the scenes, and then of course somebody's going to come and be like, "Hey, well, I'm leaving too." And if it's familiar, am I saying that's the right thing to do? Absolutely not. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if you think that wasn't part of it, and that these guys were all like 100% locked in when, to bring up Peyton Waters as the example, who I'm going to certainly get to later on, there were two veteran safeties coming in. And do you think that one of those guys in that room, like we said on the show, was going to leave? You think that might have not have been the key for him to be like, "Oh, yeah, maybe I want to go somewhere where I'm going to be able to start next year, and I'm familiar with this coaching staff"? I certainly believe that was a part of it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the other side of that equation is just go through the entire list of guys on this current roster that are not Jedd Fisch guys. And when I say not Jedd Fisch guys, I don't mean that as Jedd doesn't want him here. I mean that as Jedd did not personally recruit them. Like you mentioned, Peyton Waters is a Kalen DeBoer, Chuck Morrell guy. You look, Jason Robinson is a Jamarcus Shepard guy. You go everybody that is transferred. Khmori House, the closest guy that you could say maybe was a Robert Bala guy, maybe. But even then, that's still not a Jedd Fisch. Like everybody that stayed this year, and honestly, you could throw Thad in that conversation. That could have gone after last season. That could have gone if Tacario Davis had come last season, that probably would have gone. So in that same mold, you look at it and think, okay, it's not concerning from the sense of Damon's leaving, Adam Muhammad's leaving, Audric Harris is leaving. And I'm going, obviously, to be clear, because I don't want anybody to clip this out of context, none of those guys were leaving that I just mentioned. But with that, that would be a cause for concern. Where I remember the Wilner piece over in October, November, when it's like, hey, I don't know, is UW going to be able to keep Damon? Is UW going to? And it's like that was not the question. It was going to be, can they keep these supplementary pieces, these younger pieces, knowing how much of a backlog there was? I mean, we haven't mentioned Raheem Wright, who is a Jedd Fisch guy and a Jason and a John Richardson guy. That one would be a surprise. So you just look through some of these guys, and it's like, yeah, they're losses, but the whole point of Jedd's mantra for recruiting premium elite talent on a yearly basis from the high school level, it's why you go and get a Dylan Robinson. It's why you go and get a Xavier Freeney-Sale. It's why you go and get a Jonathan Epperson to fill in the slot or whatever you want to do with him. And you just go and look. Again, how many times have we done this the last 2 or 3 months? Just go down the list of these names we've said over and over and over again. It's like your favorite NFL team might have a veteran on the team or might have a younger guy that they need to trade away to get, an extra piece, or the veteran to cut him because you don't have the room. These are hard decisions that have to be made. And you can, the fact that nobody has brought up, why not just go to 105? Why not just cut into the revenue? I love how nobody's mentioning that.
Yeah. And that's part of it where we're not ever going to get that far, since Jedd has been just so steadfast and we are staying at 85. You're right. You are. And I just, the more that I look at this, the more like you can have your feelings. And this isn't, I know I've planted my flag as the Belichick guy over the course of the season and everything else like that. This has nothing to do with that, in my opinion. It doesn't. Where you and I have accepted that being like going into the transfer portal, the way that has impacted college sports is here to stay. You can't control that. You just kind of have to accept it and move on going forward. And that's a big part of this. Is keep in mind, like let's say Steve Belichick does leave on December, whatever day it was that Bill Belichick took the job. Do you think that a couple of these guys might not still end up at North Carolina if he did take the job? Like let's be real about that. Where Thad, and like to bring this back to Thad in the final minute or two here before we move on, Thad would absolutely still have been in that discussion because, as you said, Lars, you were not expecting him to be back in middle of December. We weren't having this conversation. You and I, if Tacario was to become available, you and I knew that was going to be a big conversation point. And then, of course, the JUCO stuff comes down. Thad does still come in, and it's, wow, you have an opportunity to do something, really special here in the secondary. And Thad doesn't want to play nickel. He made that very, very clear online that he does not want to play nickel.
Yeah, and I think it's also acceptable because then if you look at here's the caveat of that situation. If you kick him in the nickel, Dyson or somebody else is leaving. And Jordan Shaw already left. So that opened the spot for Thad to even be in that conversation to go to nickel. Because if Jordan Shaw's there, you're going to say, okay, well, now you're kicking Jordan Shaw. Somebody was leaving one way, and probably two guys at least were leaving. And to kind of wrap a bow on this whole thing, when you mentioned the whole Belichick thing, yeah, it's like if Belichick had been fired or whatever or left and just done like how a head coach leaves right away and doesn't stay for the bowl game, those guys, like, first of all, coaches can't then like meet with players like, hey guys, want to get in front of the room saying, hey, I'm leaving, but I want to take you, and you. You can't publicly, admit to doing that. So all you kind of have to do is just fade away, which I know there was also another story like, hey, what happened to Belichick? When his arrival at Washington mirrored his departure at Washington. I remember shooting that video because Scotty Graham, shout out to UW's running backs coach, who retweeted my video of the players walking in. I remember last year at a basketball game, the entire coaching staff, seemingly the entire coaching staff, walked onto the court and Jedd introduced himself and everybody kind of waved. And you can see Richardson and you can see Kafusi and you can see a couple of guys. One guy you didn't see, Steve Belichick. Go take the UNC game that the entire Bill Belichick UNC coaching staff was at this past weekend. No photo with Steve Belichick. Doesn't mean he's not there. I also just question, does he want to be a head coach in that role? Because I don't think that guy like that kind of personality is going to match, being a head coach in a couple of years.
And that's a different discussion for a different day. But Lars, Thaddeus Dixon, biggest loss in the transfer portal. I still think Peyton Waters is second. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if you pick it, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yep, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, I'm all about the hot takes this season. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards and Travis Kelce for more than 70 receiving yards. It's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. So, Lars, I think Peyton Waters is still the second biggest loss we've seen Washington suffer this transfer portal season, just because we really liked his upside. The coaching staff really did as well. And it's just at a position where we understand it. There's a whole lot of young talent in the secondary, especially at the safety position, and somebody was going to leave. But I just think that one in particular is a really big blow.
I do, although, and again, there's no slight to Peyton, great kid out of NI, Birmingham, your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I played baseball there.
I don't know. I feel like that was your high school, but I was like, I know it's your neck of the woods.
That's what I played.
Clarify that. But this was a guy where I remember talking to him during his recruitment, and I think for that entire 23-24 class, the freshmen that played this past season, you really can't fault any of them for what they did, especially if they were committed to the old staff, because there was a lot of those guys where it was like, hey, we shut down our recruitment early. And the reason why I say it's not as big of a loss as Khmori House, who's my biggest loss, is because he played all 12 games on defense. Like, I think Waters, had he usurped, let's say, Mikkel, or there was no way he was going to usurp Cam Fab, but just in a world, let's say he plays all world, and it's no slight to what he did this season because most of it was on special teams. But I think that would be a little more of a concerning loss, where I just look at Khmori and I think, man, like, the versatility he had, the impact that he had, like, there were so many things that Khmori could do. Now, you're replacing the linebacker, so again, it's not a loss in that sense. But I think just of the two, which one was a better freshman? If I say you can only have one, Softy's favorite, you can only have one, I'm taking Khmori House. But I understand the argument that can be made for Peyton Waters.
Yeah, so that's why I went with Peyton Waters, where I look at the upgrades that were made at both positions, and I really like both of them. And I legitimately do believe they're upgrades because Alex McLaughlin, especially that, like, I'm so high on his talent. You look at linebacker, you bring in 3 guys with, 2 of them have 2 years of eligibility remaining. And with the plan for Jacob Manu, where it seems to be that he's going to redshirt, that makes 3 guys with 2 years of eligibility remaining. So all of a sudden, Khmori is a guy that you can build around. That's still great. And that still really does suck in that regard. But you look at just the body types, the physicality that they bring to the table. Khmori had a little bit more to develop in terms of physically, where he's a little bit undersized. And I think that's why, he ended up choosing UNC, is not only the familiarity with Steve and the scheme, it's just he knows that scheme is what's going to work for him best. So I think that is kind of why I put Peyton over him, where with Ryan Walters, there's going to be a little bit more emphasis on the defensive backs. We've obviously seen how well they've developed in his scheme previously. So that's where I go there. But then, Lars, outside of those 3 guys, I'm curious to get your take on this, because for me personally, I think the biggest loss outside of those 3 is Lance Holtzclaw.
Interesting. I mean, again, this is where, I'll run with yours and I'll give you my next one, because I hadn't thought of Lance. I would probably put Lance in my top 5 because, again, it's the high upside. You saw what you could do when he had it. The pushback that I would give is the same one I'm going to give that I gave for Peyton Waters. You didn't see him as much. And that's no slight to Lance, whereas, again, there were so many guys in that room, Jaden Wayne, who also transferred out. You had to go through, I think, was it the USC game where he had that one pressure, one play, basically, the entire game. And that was kind of the moment for me where I'm thinking, Lance is a good character kid. So there's no character, there's no discipline concerns in that realm. I don't believe he was injured. Now, yes, you can say game plan, maybe, certain teams or whatever, but I'm like, against USC, I would think a more passing team, you'd have more than just one snap for a guy like Lance Holtzclaw. But then at that same point, the reason why I would say Lance would be farther down on mine, and I would put guard Memolar as my next one, would be because a starter, a guy that now you're still looking at offensive line saying, do we have 2 starting guards right now? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But that veteran presence, especially along the offensive line, I think that is going to be one of the more underrated losses in terms of he's a 1-year guy, so you're not losing a ton of Khmori and Peyton and these guys, the younger guys, but having that guaranteed lockdown of, hey, look, we got a starting left guard, we can put Gear in at right guard, or having compete with Pocky. Now you don't necessarily have those interior line concerns.
So I see where you're going with that. I think that guard going elsewhere might be one of the signs of a question we've gotten very frequently is about Pocky Finau and how the coaching staff might feel about him. Where if guard comes to them and says, hey, I do want, and this is all speculation at this point, but if guard comes to them and says, hey, I am really interested in coming back for another season, I'd love to do that. But the staff says, yeah, we feel right now that Pocky might be our best option because he's got 4 years of eligibility remaining, because we did choose to redshirt him this year and we just love his upside so much, which, we say this every time we mention him. If you talk to literally anybody around the program about Pocky Finau, they cannot contain their excitement for how much they like him and what his ceiling is, everything like that. So I think that kind of plays into why I would put Lance over guard. But the other thing for me in that regard is just his fit in the system. Where let's look at who Washington has brought in along the defensive line this year. I really like these acquisitions. I think Khmori Pepa is a fantastic, somewhat underrated addition just in terms of what we've seen when he's healthy and what he can be in this scheme with I don't want to say limited snap count, but with a strong rotation around him. And I feel the same thing about Ontario Thompson, where he's got all the upside necessary. And then on the edge, it's Taita Uiagalelei, who has been really solid. He had 45 pressures in the last couple of years at Arizona and is just a big body that you might need on the edge to help set it against the run. And he's somebody that pairs really well when you need some of these bigger, more physical defensive linemen out there. I just look at Lance, and with the scheme that Ryan Walters is going to run, it asks for these stand-up outside linebackers. And that's something that Lance fits really, really well in. I love his first step off the ball. I love the way he gets off the line of scrimmage. So I look at all that and I say the upside that he brings in this scheme is really nice, because I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, hey, it would be really nice to get another edge rusher in here. And it's okay. Well, and you mentioned it perfectly, where he went elsewhere and to get snaps. And the reason I also have Lance as high as I do is look at where he went. It's something we've talked about before with Khmori Pepa. It's if Kyle Whittingham, and with a lot of other guys too, when we talk about the recruiting trail, different things, if Kyle Whittingham believes you can play defense and wants to offer you, wants to prioritize you, then you're a really good defender. Like that's just my 2 cents on the matter there. And Lance goes to Utah, and I think he's going to do really well in that scheme. I'm excited to see what's next for him. And of course, I understand why he goes elsewhere to go get more snaps and everything like that. But that's just one of those guys where the more I look at it, the more I say this scheme can't have enough talented high upside pass rushers. And I think he would have fit into that really well. But then again, I do like the guys that are behind him. So the move makes sense on both fronts, in my opinion. That's just a guy that would have been nice to have around.
I think it's an even trade. I made this joke a couple of months ago on the podcast when I said, man, imagine the day you can trade players.
Right.
I make that trade for Khmori Pepa for Lance. You're getting good for good in terms of you needed more help on the interior. You look at as you mentioned, the bare front that Ryan Walters is probably going to run. I can imagine a front where you have Pepa, and you have a bigger couple of edges where Lance was a good speed rusher, but didn't have the size of a Uiagalelei, didn't have the size of a Jacob Lane, where you could also play the run without thinking, was Lance going to struggle against the run? Not that he did, not that he could, but when you look at the body types, it makes a little more sense.
Lars, we got to get into some of our agendas. Right after message from our good friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Lars, where do you want to start with these agendas? I know there are a lot of young guys that you and I are really high on, maybe some transfers coming in. I'm just going to give you the floor here.
Well, let's start with the floor that has the highest ceiling. Let's start with the obvious one.
Okay.
Damon Williams has the most total yards of any Big Ten quarterback. So I'm talking passing and rushing. I think the dynamic ability, like this is what Jedd did this season. He laid the foundation for Damon to cook and have no excuses next season. Jedd made it very clear throughout the season. We got him in 2 minutes. We got him in 4 minutes. Got him in the first half. Got him 2 starts now under his belt at Autzen and against the Louisville, a really good Louisville team in the bowl game, plus the second half against Penn State. The argument of, oh, hey, well, Damon is still growing in next year. That's fine, but I'm not going to hear it because like this whole season, you got Damon 12, 13 games for that reason. Get him a running start. I think Jedd knows how to call a game with Damon more than Will, if we're just being completely honest. So my agenda, the Damon train, like, let me make this clip worthy here. Everyone's talking about DJ Lagway.
Yeah.
Damon Williams will finish higher in the Heisman voting next season than DJ Lagway.
All right. That is the definition of a bold take and an agenda, and I absolutely love that. I don't think I have one quite that bold right now because I've got a whole bunch that I really wanted to get into where I'm going to start with just some of these young guys, some of these new faces that you're going to see on the roster. The first one that I'm going to go with isn't necessarily a new face because he was on the roster last season, but we haven't seen him play in a game yet. And I think Justice Williams is going to be a big time player on this roster. I love the film. Like all his high school film was fantastic. And obviously, Lars, as you and I have noted, he spent the 2024 season recovering from an injury he suffered at the high school level. Doesn't sound like it's a long-term thing, as you've noted, and something where he seems to be back and I believe is expected to participate in spring ball. So that's a guy who I just look at the measurables, 6'4", 200 pounds, whatever he is, with the background of his dad played tight end in the NFL. And you watch him move, you watch the way he is on film. This is a guy who I think is going to break into the depth chart at some point this season. I'm not going to go quite as far as saying he's going to start by, the beginning of the year or anything like that. But I think we're going to get to the end of the 2025 season and we're going to look back and we're going to say, all right, yeah, that was a breakout player. This guy was, a really nice piece when, as of right now, as you said, as you and I both mentioned the other day, there are some questions around this pass catching group. Not in terms of the talent, but in terms of the production, the experience at the college level, because there's a lot of young guys, a lot of underclassmen who have not seen significant reps. And when we look back on it and we say, oh, who stepped up? Was it Chris Lawson? Was it Raiden Vinesbright? Was it Audric Harris? I think the first name, like Rasheed Williams, is going to be somebody who you and I expect to start, especially after this Jonte Cook thing, where if Justice Williams becomes a big part of this rotation, like I can absolutely see him just becoming one of the more explosive threats in the conference.
I mean, from a talent perspective, he should. Like, that's just the question will be how much can he get at the speed? Where is he at? How much did last season set him back in terms of his long-term progress? I like that, though, because, the receivers, everything about this offense is there to cook, but everything starts up front. And so the agenda that we're probably going to beat the most in 2025 is, can this offensive line get it together? Can Max McCree become a, even honorable mention Big Ten candidate? Can Drew as a party? Like those, let's start with tackles specifically, because my agenda for those two guys is going to be, look, you took the trial by fire in 2024. You both have experience in power forward or now G5 level with as a party. You guys have to rebound more than you did last season, because you look at PFF's numbers, it was not pretty. And you saw Kaylee Tabai transfer out, so Max, that, and then you get Carver Willis, and so same thing in that mold. Like somebody's going to lose out on the job there, and so that's why you go and get Carver. And so my point is just the offensive line agenda. That was the number one agenda coming in the offseason. You addressed it premierly with Carver Willis. Guerin is also a good addition, don't get me wrong, but that is going to make or break Washington season.
So I'm with you there. Another one that I want to get to is I think this pass rush and this defensive line is going to be much improved. And I think it has to do with, in the same vein, the additions that you went out and made in the offseason. I look at this defensive tackle pairing of Simone Peppa and Ontario Thompson, and I just think that, that's the desired physicality. That's the desired size. It's the desired athleticism. That's everything that you want. And if everybody can stay healthy. Now, as we've seen, that's a very big if. But I think that that's going to help this team take a major step forward in 2025 where, Javon Parker coming off the Achilles is not going to be easy. Armand Parker has had some real trouble getting on the field during his career. That's not going to be easy. But I look at all those guys, and then somebody who I want to really get to over the course of this discussion that I think can really step up and be a big part of this is Omar Khan, where Jedd is certainly going to be looking for some of these young players to step up. And I think he's a perfect just kind of name to bring up in that regard, where you look at the background, right? A state champion wrestler in Texas, just has the ideal size, the athleticism, where I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who's a super impactful pass rusher. But I think that when you look at what his career might be at Washington 2, 3, 4 years down the line, he could be utilized a lot like Greg Gaines was, next to a Simone Peppa, next to a Logan Sagapolu, next to just a big two-gap stuffer kind of guy, where he has the strength and he's got just the anchor needed to hold the line against the run and be just a true run stuffer in that Greg Gaines mold, where I'm not making a player comparison by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a huge Greg fan from his time here, and it's like he was truly a one-of-a-kind player, in my opinion. But I think that Omar Khan could be one of those guys who, alongside Alinius Davis, who could take a step forward, outside of Bryce Butler, who could also take a step forward with everybody else who's coming back in terms of from injury with the talent that we know they have, that this defensive line will have what last year's did not, and that's real depth.
And what it needed to have last year.
Yeah.
Like that was the other side of that equation. And I know I like that because I would say one of Alinius or Omar's got to pop. Now, whichever one ends up bringing the most out, the cream rises to the top. That's a good position to be in. But one of those two guys is going to have to pop no matter what, because you look at that room and think, okay, Javon Parker, even if he comes back healthy, like you just want a good rotation. And I think we saw in the Big Ten, it's like if you're able to leave those guys in for an entire drive, great. That's
sure.
Fine. But the odds of that happening, I'm not willing to bet on that. So when you look at the numbers, I'm absolutely in agreement with you there. The other agenda that I think I want to finish on, and I'll leave you to get the last one here. There was a man that was ripped unnecessarily last year. I mean, necessarily, but unnecessarily. Because of what he did in 2023, he's going to have a redemption year in 2025. You know who I'm talking about. That's one Grady Gross. There's a guy that will make or break 2 or 3 games this year, and I am full go Team Grady, like still with the team, did not, and I'm proud, I want to say this, I'm proud of Grady for not transferring out. I'm proud of Jedd for not bringing in another kicker, even though Jesus Gomez was very intriguing. Shout out to Kenny Dillingham for pulling him at ASU. So unless you're going to go and get a mammoth Justin Tucker, let Grady redeem himself. He proved that he could win big games in 23 and prove it again in 2025.
I like where you're going with that. All right, I got to end on one that I've been on all season long, or all off season long, really, since he committed. And that's Alex McLaughlin is going to establish himself as one of the best safeties in the Big Ten. I just, every time I watch his film, I'm just so excited about what he can bring to the secondary, where I look at nickel, and I do believe that it's going to be more of a battle between Dyson McCutcheon and Rashawn Clark. But I look at safety, and I look at what he could do next to Mikel Esteen in a rotation with CJ Christian, and the way he hits, the way he comes downhill, the eyes that he has, just everything. Watching it play, he's like a missile, man. Like getting into the backfield, the way he's able to do it. Like the numbers, yeah, they're at an FCS level, but the numbers don't lie, because when you can play no matter what level it's at. And I think this is somebody who we're going to get in the spring camp. And I think he's one of the players that's going to pop right away, in my opinion. And, the first day or two, when you and I are standing there with the rosters in our hand, being like, oh, who's that guy? Who's that guy? I'm still getting to learn more so numbers than names. I think that he's one who's going to flash over and over and over again, because he has everything you want at the position. And if we get to the end of the year and he's able to, I don't want to say replicate what he did at Northern Arizona, because that's not fair. Those numbers are out of this world insane. With 16 PBUs, I think it's 6 interceptions, 12 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks. I'm pretty sure I'm in the right ballpark there at the very least, because it's truly insane what he was able to do. If he's able to take, I want to say 70 to 75% of that over to Washington and into this scheme, he's going to be so impactful. And truly, he's going to make you forget about some of the guys that might have left. And I'm really excited about what the future holds for just that kid with everything he's shown. Lars, As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast, which is also where you can find this show. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so never miss we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.